From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Simply because I'm a citizen in a democracy. So that automatically implies I'm an activist, you're an activist, you're all activists. Anybody who decides to reside in the democracy is an activist. If you're not an activist, if we're not, then the democracy ceases to exist.
Michael Moore, today an hour with the Academy Award-winning filmmaker on his life, his films, his activism. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today, in this Democracy Now! Special, we spend the hour with one of the most famous independent filmmakers in the world, Michael Moore. For the past 20 years, Michael has been one of the most politically active, provocative, and successful documentary filmmakers in the business. His films include Roger and Me, Bowling for Columbine, for which he won the Academy Award, Fahrenheit 9/11, Sicko, and his latest, Capitalism, a love story. Michael Moore recently joined us in our Democracy Now! Studios in New York for an event celebrating the launch of the greenest internet TV radio studios in the country. Juan Gonzalez and I interviewed him before a rapt audience of hundreds. I began by asking Michael Moore why he first became a filmmaker.
I had a newspaper in Flint, Michigan called the Flint Voice. And so it was a, underground alternative newspaper that I edited and put out for about 10 years. And and we were always going up against General Motors and the powers that be in town and not getting very far. And then there was a magazine out in San Francisco that had been subscribing to my paper and asked me if I would come out and be the editor of this magazine. And so I thought that sounded like a cool idea to do what I was doing in Flint and do it on a national scale. So I took the job, and right away there were problems with the owner of the magazine and me that we didn't see eye to eye on a number of things. I wanted the magazine to try and reach more of a working class audience, and they were more concerned, I think, about reaching more of a college-educated, liberal group of people, and which are good people. So I was fired on Labor Day, about 4 months 4 months into it, so I was out of work, and I'd given up everything in Flint. I'd sold my paper and the house and everything, and it was, I don't know if you've ever been unemployed, but it's not pleasant, and you don't know what's going to happen next. Of course, I just had a high school education, so I wasn't qualified to do anything or whatever. So I went back to Michigan, and just to visit friends and family. And while I was there was a news bulletin that came on TV saying that Roger Smith was announcing that he was going to lay off another 30,000 people at GM, 10,000 of which would be in Flint. And Flint had already lost about 20,000 jobs at that point. Now this is 1986. So I just thought, I should just make a movie about this. And I didn't know anything about making a movie, and I hadn't gone to film school or whatever. But the year before, these people had come to Flint to make a movie about the Klan and the Nazis that were kind of preying upon the unemployed at that time in Michigan. And they asked me if I would help them. And so I said sure, and because they knew of my paper. And I kind of thought it was kind of cool, how they did this, and I was watching how they did it. And one of them had made a film called The Atomic Cafe, a documentary back in the 80s. Remember that? It was very funny, kind of cool documentary. And then the second person, Ann Boland, had made a film that I think won the Oscar. It was called With Babies and Banners. It was about the women's involvement in the Flint sit-down strike of 1936 and 37. And the third person was Jim Ridgway, who was the great columnist of the Village Voice. And And so, so a year later, I got the idea of making this movie, and I called up Kevin, who had made the Atomic Cafe, Kevin Rafferty, and asked him if he would come to Flint and teach me how to make a movie. And he said, yeah, I'll come there for a week, and brought his camera and some film and showed me how to operate the camera and the sound machine and everything. And we shot about 60 rolls of film. We began on the 50th anniversary of the sit-down strike on February 11th in 1987. And I don't know if anybody's heard this story before, but it was a couple years later, we were in Washington, D.C. By this time, I knew you. We'd gone over to Israel and the West Bank and Gaza and had rubber bullets shot at us, and
learned how to deal with tear gas. The lemon the kids gave us, onions.
It was man, that was quite a trip. We should talk about this sometime, because it was such an eye opener for me, and I'll never forget the absolute devastating poverty that we witnessed in Gaza, especially that. Even though I had traveled other places around the world, I'd never seen anything like that. But that's for another show. Anyway, so I'm in Washington, D.C. We're editing Roger and Me, and it's January 20th of 1989. George I was being inaugurated, and I said to the editors, why don't we go over and watch inauguration? I'd never seen inauguration, so we walked over there, and on the mall, and they had these big TV screens, and up on the podium behind George Bush was Kevin Rafferty, who was my teacher, taught me how to make this film and everything. And I'm thinking, oh, he must be making a movie, or I wonder how do you get access up there? It was just so weird, you know. It was like 3 rows behind Bush, and so a couple days later, I called him up and I said, I could have sworn I saw you sitting up there behind the president. And he said, yeah, that was me. And I said, well, were you making a movie, or did you just get special tickets, or what? He said, no, the president's my uncle. He'd never told me. His mother and Barbara Bush were sisters. And it was so shocking to hear this, and I was like, and then when the movie came out, the Elder Bush wanted to have a screening at Camp David for the extended family, because it was cousin Kevin's camera work in the movie, and so there's this screening there, and I wasn't allowed into the screening, but I asked him later what it was like, and he said, well, it was kind of quiet in there, except. There was one of my cousins. He was laughing a lot, but I don't think it was because of the movie. Another George. That was the first time I'd heard that name. So, anyways, that's why I've never really wanted to say a bad word about the Bush family, because if it weren't for them, I wouldn't be a filmmaker. So, I have an enormous amount of gratitude. So that's how I got my start.
Michael, I'd like to get back to that newspaper. You said it was called the Flint Voice?
Yeah, the Flint Voice, right.
What made you decide to start a newspaper? And what was it? I mean, was this a weekly? Did you have any staff? Or?
Well, I started my first newspaper in 4th grade, and the nuns shut it down after a few issues. And so I restarted it in 6th grade, and they shut it down then. And I restarted it in 8th grade, and then the priest, the bishop, they all got involved in it to try and stop me from putting this little newspaper out.
Why did they want to shut it down?
Well, because I was writing about things that we weren't supposed to be discussing, especially in the Catholic Church. So I think I referred to it as a woman-hating institution. Well, it just seemed odd to me as a child that, I mean, I grew up in a family. I mean, I've always, in every machination of a family I've been a part of, I've been the minority as the male. I mean, I had a mother and 2 sisters, no brothers, so my dad and I were, doing the dishes, and then I have a wife and a daughter. So just as a child, my mom was really good about stuff like this, about the gender stuff and how my sisters were treated and what was expected of them and me and all of that. So I got really lucky on that end. And these were just working class people. My dad worked on the assembly line building spark plugs for GM cars. So, so by the time I was, I guess, 19 years old, I decided to try and do a newspaper for real and figured out how to do it. And, tried to raise some ad money and all that, and I didn't get very far. And I heard this guy was going to play a concert over in Grand Rapids,